stop to wonder how a conflict that's happening thousands of miles away can actually hit you right in your wallet? It feels like it shouldn't be connected, right? But it absolutely is. In this explainer, we're going to connect those dots between what's happening on the world stage and your own personal finances. Let's get into it.
I mean, really? You might think a military event on the other side of the planet has nothing to do with you, but the connection is way more direct than you'd think. These global events create these economic ripples that touch everything, and I mean everything, from the gas in your car to the food on your table. So let's trace exactly how a crisis over there ends up costing you more right here.
Okay, so our story here kicks off in early March 2026. This is the moment, according to the reports we've seen, that coordinated U.S. and Israeli strikes hit targets inside Iran. Now, tensions were already incredibly high, but this was the act that really poured gasoline on the fire and escalated the whole situation.
So, the official reason given for these strikes was to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. But as you can imagine, the response was fast and it was forceful. Iran launched its own drone and missile attacks on U.S. assets in the region, and this is the really crucial part for our story, it immediately moved to disrupt one of the most important shipping lanes on the entire planet. And that right there brings us to the absolute heart of the economic story: oil. Because when this specific region of the world becomes unstable, the entire global energy supply just holds its breath.
20%. Just let that number sink in for a second. What is that? Well, that is the share of the entire world's oil supply that has to squeeze through one single, incredibly narrow channel of water.
And that waterway is the Strait of Hormuz. You really have to think of it as a major artery for the global economy. If that artery gets clogged, even for a little while, the effects are felt everywhere, almost instantly. It is the very definition of a strategic choke point.
So get this. Iran didn't even need to fully block the strait to cause a massive problem. Nope, just the threat of disruption was enough. Maritime insurers, the companies that provide coverage for these huge tankers, they immediately pulled that coverage. And just like that, tanker traffic plummeted almost overnight. The flow of oil got squeezed hard.
Now, if there's one thing financial markets hate more than anything else, it's uncertainty. And a sudden threat to 20% of the world's oil? Well, that is about as uncertain as it gets. So the reaction from the market was, you guessed it, instantaneous.
And this shows you just how fast it happened. U.S. crude oil jumped up over 5%, Brent crude, which is the international standard, shot up nearly 7%. And for everyday people, the average price for a gallon of gas in the U.S. spiked by 11 cents. All of this happened within the first day or two of the conflict.
But it is really important to keep things in perspective here. As oil analyst Rory Johnston points out, this initial jump was actually pretty mild compared to what we saw after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So why was that? Well, a key reason was that global oil inventories were actually pretty high before all this kicked off, and that provided a nice cushion that helped keep prices from just spiraling completely out of control. All right, so after that initial shockwave hit, the really big question became, what happens next? And this is where economists started mapping out two very, very different futures, all depending on how this conflict might evolve.
Now, what's so fascinating here is how it lays out these two radically different paths. On one hand, you have the contained disruption. This is the best-case scenario, where the conflict stays limited. Sure, oil prices go up a little bit, but there's no major hit to inflation or growth. But then you have the global oil shock. If the conflict drags on, oil could jump by a staggering $50 a barrel. And in that world, U.S. inflation would climb up to 3.5%, and economic growth would slow to an absolute crawl at just 1.2%. Two very different worlds.
But a major oil shock isn't just about paying more for gas at the pump. Oh no. Its effects ripple outwards, touching pretty much every single part of the economy in ways that you might not even think about.
And economist Kathy Beschanchik just nails the core issue right here. It all comes down to confidence. A geopolitical conflict like this injects a massive dose of uncertainty into the whole system. And you know what that does? It makes businesses and regular consumers nervous.
This shows the chain reaction perfectly. It's like a set of dominoes. When businesses are unsure about what the future holds, they hit pause on big decisions, like building a new factory or hiring more people. Well, that slows down job growth. And when people start getting worried about their jobs, they spend less money, which weakens consumer confidence. And when everyone stops spending, the whole economy can start to slow down.
This uncertainty creates a massive headache for central banks, like the U.S. Federal Reserve. I mean, they're in a really, really tough spot. Here's why. If the conflict makes gas more expensive, that pushes inflation up.
To fight that, the Fed normally raises interest rates to cool the economy down. But if all this uncertainty is already slowing the economy down, the Fed wants to cut interest rates to boost growth. See the problem? They're trapped. Do you fight inflation or do you fight a slowdown? As Fed official Neil Kashkari noted, events like these made him much less sure about any future rate cuts. It is a classic economic tightrope walk.
So after looking at the initial event, the market reaction, and all these potential paths forward, what's the key thing you should take away from all of this?
Well, the bottom line is really this. Our world is so deeply interconnected now, an event that happens thousands of miles away doesn't just stay there. It creates these ripples that travel across the entire globe and end up affecting everything from your job security to how much you're paying at the grocery store.
And that really leaves us with one final question to think about. In a world this tightly linked by trade, by finance, and by information, is any crisis ever truly local anymore? It's something worth pondering. Thanks for joining us.